So in the next section, we'll be covering several important topics that is related to Terraform. So we'll start with the first one, which is variables and outputs. So we know that variables are something that allows you to pass in certain parameters, pass in the values of parameters in the TF-var file, and it allows you to make your code configurable. So instead of hard coding the values within your Terraform blocks, you can specify that in a separate file, and all you need to do whenever you want to make any changes, you just have to go to this file and make your changes. That is the advantage of variables. Outputs allow you to print output values whenever you run Terraform apply. Also, when you're using modules, sometimes we want to use these outputs generated by one module into another module. So in that situation also outputs are useful. So this is the main idea of variables and outputs in Terraform. The next thing we'll go into is, I'll look at the topic. The topic is talking about secure secret injection best practice. So it's something about security. So before that, we'll first understand what is um, service principal, which we also call as SPN in Azure. So first of all, what is SPN or what is service principal? Service principal is nothing but a combination of your username and password together. It is a combination of a few parameters like that, which is used for apps or any script to log into Azure. So for example, let's say whenever you want to deploy certain resources into Azure using Terraform, Terraform needs to log in into Azure. And you don't want to give your personal login info to that. So instead you will create this combination of username and password, which is called as service principal, to log in. So that's the major and very simple idea of it. So it's how Terraform, GitHub Actions, Azure DevOps or any Azure tool can authenticate securely to Azure without any human interaction. So a service principal usually has three components in it, 3 or 4 components in it, which is usually a client ID, which is like a username, then a client secret, which is like a password, then it has tenant ID and subscription ID. Usually this is what a service principal has. So in your code, usually what you will do is we'll pass these values as a part of the provider block, or if you do not want to do that, you can pass these values as environment variables into Terraform. So there's two ways, provider block or using environment variables. Now, are these secrets? Yes, obviously client secret is absolute secret and it is treated like a password. So you should never, usually when you write your code and Terraform code and then you try to push it into the ADO or push it into GitHub, you need to remove these values, these secrets from your code, because if you're passing it into the provider's block, then it will be a part of your code. So you'll have to remove these values and then you'll have to push it in. So now how do we make use of an SPN or a service principal in Terraform? As we told, there are two different ways. One way is to make use of them as environment variables. So by making use of the export ARM underscore client ID underscore ID, and then you put the value into it, the place where the X is written. Do the same thing for all the 4 parameters. And then as usual, you run your Terraform init and Terraform apply. So it will be a part of your environment variable in your system. And Terraform will automatically know from the ARM prefix that this name has, this environment variable name has, it can identify that, okay, this is related to this Azure RM provider, and it needs to make use of these variables in the code. I mean the values of these variables in the code. Now the second option that we can use is we can make use of a provider block. So which is not usually recommended. So what we'll do is inside the Azure RM provider block, you'll specify these 4 SPN values into your code. So where to store your SPN securely? So these values, you can store them inside Azure Key Vaults, or you can store them as environment variables, or you can make use of Terraform cloud environment where you can store these. It is when you're using team-based pipelines, or you can make use of GitHub secrets or Azure DevOps library. These are some of the places where you can store the values of SPN securely. So to summarize, first of all, what is service principal? Service principal is nothing but it is an app that is it is a password username combination that we can use to log into Azure. And client ID, client secret, tenant ID, subscription, all of these are values that together, which these values all together that forms a service principal. Usually you put these values into the a provider's block, or you can also put them as a part of environment variable so that it can be accessed whenever Terraform needs to log in into Azure and access it. Now, among these values, client secret is the one which needs to be very safely handled. It is a secret, okay? And client secret in state file, it will be it is secure within the state file, so it is fine. It will be stored as plain text itself, but it will be secure inside the state file, so it is not a problem. So now coming to the word secret injection. Secret injection refers to the secure practice of handling sensitive information or passing sensitive informations like secrets into your application without hard coding them. So the main idea is these kind of values should never be hard coded in your code. So instead of hard coding them, you will store them in certain places like the Azure Key Vault or the HashiCorp Vault or GitHub Secrets. There are so many possible ways, or you can store them as environment variables. So this is what secret injection best practices in Terraform are. So these secrets like database passwords, API keys, client secrets, SSH keys, all these should not be hard coded into your TF files because they can be leaked when you try to push the code into the remote repos. So the best practices for a secure secret injection is, first of all, never hard coding these secrets into TF files. It's a bad practice. And also, in case you know that some variable is important, is a secret, you need to mark them as sensitive. So there is a parameter that you can include in Terraform called as sensitive, and you just have to make the value of it true. And what it will do is it will prevent you from passing those passwords from being displayed in the CLI output. It will make sure those values are not shown in the CLI output. Then third way is you can pass secrets via CLI or by using TF-vars. So you can just pass them while running the Terraform apply. You can just pass the value as an argument in the CLI itself, or you can just put these values in the TF-vars. But again, this also, since it's again another way of hard coding itself, so you have to be a little careful. And so when you do this, make sure that you add the TF-var file as a part of the .gitignore so that it will not be pushed into the remote repository. And the fourth way is to use environment variables as for secrets. So you can just use this command export TF-vars and add it as a environment variable. So basically there are 4 different ways of secure secret injection. First of all, never hard coding the code details and also marking those values which is important as sensitive, and then passing these values through the CLI while running them, or passing it through TF-var file, and lastly making use of environment variables for secrets. So we have been talking about environment variables a lot, but let's understand what it basically means. So it's nothing but a temporary named value which is stored into your computer memory so that whenever any app or script needs certain values, it can use these values and run. So think of it like writing a secret on a sticky note and showing it only when the script is running, and then they disappear when you're done. So why do we use it? So whenever you don't want to hard code secrets or certain configurations in code, you can use environment variables. Or you want to securely pass passwords, API keys, SPN credentials to Terraform and other tools like in this situation. And also to make these scripts reusable for different environments. So an example of Terraform with Azure SPN. Here you are setting up all these values as environment variables. And then now when you run Terraform init or Terraform apply, Terraform would read these values from your memory and not from the TF files. So what happens when you set an environment variable? So when you run this line export TF this thing with this value, you're telling the system, hey, keep this variable TF var db password in the memory and give it to Terraform whenever it asks. So then now Terraform can read it. So whenever you just write variable or db password, it knows that it needs to get it from here. So what it doesn't do, it does not permanently store the value. So it does not show it in the .tf value, df state file, or not the tf state file, the tf file or the state file, and it disappears as soon as you close the terminal. So it's a temporary value that is stored. So where can you set the environment variables? You can use the terminal, or you can use the PowerShell, or you can put it as a part of your CI/CD pipelines, or you can also create environment files which files in tools like Docker and Terraform Cloud. We can use these environment files and put these values there. Another question that comes up right now is, how does Terraform know which environment variable to use? Since environment variable is not something specific to Terraform or any application, it is for every application. You just use the export command and you add it into the system. So how does it know that it needs to make use of this variable? So two types of environment variables Terraform recognizes. So Terraform predefines environment variable names for provider credentials. For example, for Azure, Terraform environment variables, all of them have a standard format. So they all have this prefix of ARM. So when you see this ARM there, Terraform automatically maps it to Azure authentication because ARM prefix is hard-coded into the Azure provider plugin. So no config file is needed. Terraform already knows how to look for these names. The second, if it is Terraform variables, then